in Songshan, the central holy mountain, in Dengfengxian, Henan province, is the ancient Buddhist temple, Songyue Si. Within its compound stands a most unusual pagoda, one of 5 early pagodas of North China visited by me and my fellow workers of the Institute for Research in Chinese Architecture in the process of collecting material for a history of Chinese architecture from study of actual specimens. Built in 523 AD, this is the oldest brick pagoda existing in China today. The temple was originally the summer villa of Emperor Xiaoming of the Eastern Wei dynasty. The pagoda was built for the salvation of the emperor's deceased mother, the Empress Dowager. It has brought her blessing through 1400 years. The pagoda, emphasized to give a silhouette like that of a modern artillery shell, has both grace and grandeur. Its 12-sided plan is unique. Pagodas contemporary with this one are usually square in plan, whereas those of later periods are octagonal. The 15 stories of the pagoda also constitute an uncommon feature. On a very high base is the tall first story, above which are 15 decks of cornices of roof eaves. Though regarded as 15 stories, a pagoda with such arrangement may perhaps be more appropriately described as one-storied, 15-deck roofed. The first story is embellished at the corners with polygonal engaged columns with lotus blossom capitals. Each of the doorways on the 4 sides facing the cardinal points is arched, the extrados of the arch being shaped like a lotus petal and ending in volutes at the spring line. The other 8 sides each has a niche in the form of a 四门塔, or one-storied, 4-doored square pagoda. Undoubtedly, these niches were once occupied by statues which were lost long ago. The architectural motifs show unmistakable Indian influences. The general partie of the edifice is the primogenitor of a pagoda form that later became very popular in China. Such a 四门塔, as I have mentioned, is to be found at Shentongsi in the mountains 30 miles south of Jinan in Shandong province. These 30 miles we covered on our visit to the pagoda in a whole day's pleasant travel along rocky paths in the date flower-scented breeze of early summer, watching the ever-changing silhouette of rugged mountains against the sky until we reached the seldom visited region lying at the back of Taishan, the eastern holy mountain, which was our destination. The small one-storied stone pagoda bearing the date corresponding to 544 AD on one of the marble statues it shelters is the oldest of its kind in China. Short and stubby on first observation, the structure may be described as a pavilion, square in plan, with a core in the center and an arched doorway on each facade. The roof is a stepped pyramid surmounted by a pinnacle, which in essence is a miniature Indianesque stupa. My study of a large number of pagodas in China led me to the conclusion that the Chinese pagoda is an interesting combination of an original multi-storied Chinese structure and an Indian stupa which crowns the former. The 四门塔 of Shentongsi is one of the earliest and simplest examples of this combination and should be given a most prominent position in the evolution of the Chinese pagoda. The 2 pagodas described above date from the period of the 6 dynasties. When we come to the Tang period, it is no surprise to find 2 important pagodas among the innumerable Buddhist remains of this period in the Xi'an area in Shanxi. These are the 大雁塔 and 小雁塔, the great and little gander pagodas, sometimes translated as great and little goose pagodas. Rising high above the vast plain, they stand about 2 miles to the south of the celestial city of Xi'an and are themselves about 2 miles apart. The great one, a little earlier in date, is the more important. It stands in the temple grounds of Ci'en-si, where it was built to house the Buddhist scriptures. The present structure represents a rebuilding of an even earlier pagoda. The original was only 5 stories high and was founded by the great monk Xuanzang in 652 AD. It was said that the master, after his return from his 19-year pilgrimage to India, obtained the emperor's permission to build this pagoda to house the scriptures that he brought back. On the day when the ground was broken at the building site, he carried on his own shoulder the first shovels of earth and encircled the site 3 times in prayer. Unfortunately, this original pagoda was badly damaged in war shortly after completion. It was completely rebuilt between 701 AD and 705 AD and made 7 stories high. The plan of the pagoda is square, the construction entirely of brick. The exterior of each story is treated with pilasters and architraves in delicate relief and a corbelled cornice. The general silhouette of the 大雁 is not often seen elsewhere in China. Instead of the usual graceful antithesis, its upper stories diminished in an uncompromising incline. Sturdy and dignified, it stands as a most fitting monument to the great Buddhist pilgrim and scholar who was its founder. The only wooden pagoda existing in China today dates from the Song period. It stands about 50 miles south of Datong, Shanxi, not far outside the inner stretch of the Great Wall in the town of Yingxian. This miserable town on alkaline soil, poverty-stricken, with only a few hundred mud houses and barely a dozen trees within the city enclosure, is about 25 miles away from the nearest highway bus station. This distance I traveled by mule cart on my trip to the pagoda, suffering 6 hours of bumpy ride. It was sunset time when I reached a point about 5 miles west of the town. Most unexpectedly, I saw ahead of me, at the far end of the almost straight trail, a sparkling jewel on a dark purplish background, the red and white pagoda reflecting the golden setting sun against the mountain beyond. Rising about 200 feet above the surrounding plain, the 5-story tower is visible in good weather from places nearly 20 miles away. It was dark when I reached the walled city. The bulk of the pagoda towered over the whole town like a black giant. But on the southern side of the top story was visible a light, a spark that penetrated the enveloping darkness. That, I found out later, was the 10,000-year lamp that had been burning there day and night for nearly 900 years. The pagoda was built in 1056 AD. Octagonal in plan and constructed entirely of wood, its structure is essentially the superimposition in 5 tiers of single-story Chinese buildings. The first story has double-decked eaves supported by huge brackets, stylistically identical with those of the Guanyinge in Jixian, Hebei. Each of the 4 upper stories has a surrounding balcony and an overhanging eave, supported by its own system of brackets. On each story, doors are opened on the 4 sides facing the cardinal points, the other 4 sides being walled in with plaster and glass, decorated with paintings of arhats and bodhisattvas. On the ground floor, seated in the center of the octagonal sanctuary, is a colossal clay statue of Sakyamuni, while on the upper floors are different Buddhas, usually attended by arhats and bodhisattvas. The top of the pagoda is finished with an elaborate spire of wrought iron, secured to the corners of the uppermost roof by 8 iron chains. I was up on that spire one sunny, clear afternoon, absorbed in measuring and photographing when the clouds closed in rapidly but unnoticed. Suddenly, a terrific thunderbolt struck nearby. Taken by surprise, I nearly lost my hold on the icy cold chain 200 feet above the ground. My only other experience at all similar to this was when, without the usual alarm, some Japanese planes dropped several 250-pound bombs around my house, the nearest one only 20 feet away. This pagoda, generously spared by nature, is entering its last century of a 1,000-year cycle. We wonder, here in the Southwest, whether it has survived the fortunes of war. The Japanese besieged and took the town of Yingxian in the fall of 1937. The last and latest of these 5 pagodas is the Huata, or Flowery Pagoda of Zhengding on the Beiping-Hankou Railway in Hebei province. It is a brick structure of the Qin dynasty, 12th century AD. Its name is a tribute to its very complicated shape. Though it is octagonal in plan, with doors on the 4 sides facing the cardinal points of the compass, the other 4 sides each have a hexagonal chamber attached on the outside. The exterior finish in stucco is modeled to represent columns, beams, and brackets of wood. The pinnacle is profusely decorated with high reliefs of elephants, lions, and small one-storied stupas. It is a chaotic but not too unhappy mixture of the Indian stupa and the Chinese pagoda, a compact presentation of the 5 pagoda composition. In all my later trips, I never came across another similar structure. Hi friends, how are you doing today? I hope you liked this video. Just to reiterate, this was not my script. It was a reading word for word of a paper titled 5 Early Chinese Pagodas by Liang Sicheng, published in 1941 in Asia magazine. I was originally going to summarize it, but then I found it difficult to delete even a single word. It is just so concisely and beautifully written, and not only discusses technical aspects of each pagoda, but tells us their stories, and not just their stories, but their stories situated in both far and near futures. And not just their stories, but also the stories of the scholars who could not return home due to Japanese planes dropping 250-pound bombs around their houses. The scholars who rode 6 hours in mule carts to get to these pagodas in their research process. And of course, the sparkle in their eyes after a long journey as they looked up into the darkness in a poverty-stricken town to see the 10,000-year lamp that had been burning there day and night for nearly 900 years. There was no way my words could have even come close to matching the elegant words of Liang Sicheng, steeped in his rich knowledge and experiences and refracted through the lens of the unique age in which he lived. And so I decided to read it word for word. I hope you enjoyed this video. Thanks for watching and see you next time.